Good, how are you?
Good, you got some stuff.
Yeah, I was at the ball game yesterday.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
Go to Sox game? That's awesome. It's your game.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I stepped down the wrong spot.
Typical, yeah.
You know, they beat Boston, they beat Milwaukee, but they get beat by
Come home and get
Arma
swept.
Crop
Detroit,
Trucks.
you know?
This was like 3 runs all weekend.
Yeah.
No.
Crap.
Guess I should start us off. Is Larry coming? Call to order. This is a Monday, June 18th, 2018 Joliet City Council pre-council meeting. Christopher, you can call the roll, please.
Start with roll call. Mayor Odeker.
Here.
Councilman Dickinson.
Here.
Councilwoman Gavin.
Here.
Councilman Girl.
Here.
Councilman Hug. Absent. Councilman Morris.
Here.
Councilman Mudrin.
Here.
Councilwoman Coleman. Here. Councilman Turk. Absent. First on tonight's agenda is a presentation regarding alternative water source study by Acting Director of Public Works, Allison Swisher. Hold on a second.
Thank you. Mayor, City Council, thank you for the opportunity. Tonight I'll be talking about a very important topic, which is the city's water source. So just as a quick overview of the existing water supply for the city, we have 21 deep groundwater wells and 5 shallow groundwater wells, so our water does come from an aquifer. We have 11 water treatment plants that remove radium and over 612 miles of water main. So we currently have a very decentralized system that covers the entire city, as you can see on the attached map. So since the 1960s, aquifer desaturation has been monitored and studied, and the city and the region have studied alternative water sources. So as you can see from this graph, there's a very linear trend of water, the availability of the water in the aquifer decreasing. So the Illinois State Water Survey is the agency that has been monitoring this. And since about the mid-2000s, they've had a model that has been taking inputs and analyzing, when the water levels in the aquifer will be continue to be depleted. With refined information that they had in 2015, they refined the model and came to the conclusion that desaturation of the aquifer could recur within the next 15 to 30 years. So for that reason, it's very critical that at this time we really study this and come to a decision on how to proceed with an alternative water source. So the first step was to issue a request for qualifications to hire an engineering consultant that would help guide us and inform us on making this decision. So we issued a request for qualifications, which was published publicly in the labor record. We received 9 qualification packages, and then 6 teams were selected for interviews, which we conducted in May. The selection team consisted of multiple staff members, myself, Nick Gornick, Greg Ruddy from the Public Works Department, City Manager David Hales, as well as Inspector General Chris Regis. So from that interview process, we had a number of really excellent teams. It was a decision that took a lot of discussion. We felt like we did a lot of due diligence, and we ultimately selected the CMT team. So the CMT team is made up of 3 companies. And they're all represented here tonight. Each one is an expert in the various alternatives, and we, as a selection committee, felt that this was to the city's benefit to have expertise in each of these areas of water. So Teresa O'Grady from CMT is going to be the project manager, and she will be leading the efforts in the river water alternatives. CMT has a lot of experience conducting this work, most specifically on the Fox River with Aurora, and then also on the Kankakee River with Aqua. Stantec, we have Brian Kasich here. He and the Stantec will be leading the Lake Michigan evaluation, and Stantec has many years of experience working with IDNR on Lake Michigan allocations, as well as with Illinois American. And then EEI, working in conjunction with the Illinois State Water Survey, will be doing the analysis of the groundwater alternatives. Jeff Freeman from EEI is here tonight, and they have a lot of regional water supply planning and deep well experience.
Did you put your code in?
So this project is going to be divided into multiple phases. The first phase, which will be beginning in June and continuing through the end of the year, we will be beginning with doing stakeholder engagement and strategic planning. Then we will move into doing analysis of water demand projections and updating the groundwater model. And then move into, once we have that background information established, evaluating the 14 alternative water source options. And then based on the identification of these factors that are listed, most importantly, capacity as well as quality, we really want this phase of the study to answer the question, which of these alternatives are going to be able to provide the amount of water that we need, as well as is the water that can be provided quality water source. And we'll be looking at both as specifically for the city's demands as well as for the region as a whole. So we will have that information to present to you. Once we have the viable alternatives identified, we'll move into phase 2 of the study, which we anticipate beginning in January of 2019. And then those viable options will be analyzed in much more detail, specifically looking at transmission main options and costs. And then that information will be presented and weighted based on various criteria, and with the goal of making an ultimate decision as how to proceed by the end of next year. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit more detail about the phase 1 scope of work. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to spend a lot of time on stakeholder engagement and strategic planning. We want to make sure that we know when to get the public involved, how to get the public involved, meetings with the council and the mayor and the city manager to identify what is important to you, what are the criteria that are most important. We are forming a technical advisory committee so that we can have retired experts in the field from other agencies, IDNR, IEPA, help guide us on this, as well as a community advisory committee. So as we mentioned, it's very important to have community input from community stakeholders at the beginning. As part of this, also this first phase, we have development of a public relations campaign and strategy development. So we have on the team a person who specializes in strategic planning, and he will help guiding us through this. So once we have the stakeholders identified and involved, then the important phase is to do the water needs assessment. It's very important that we identify how much water we're going to need. In the past, this was a simple calculation of number of people times how much average water usage, but over the years we know that this is much more complicated than that. We need to look at what is the true population projections, and then how do factors such as conservation, new technologies in plumbing fixtures, and how does that impact how much water we're actually going to need. We're also going to be looking at which of these sources are sustainable. The decision we're going to be making is not for the next 10, 15 years, that we want to look for a 100-year solution so that the money that we're investing into this alternative water source is not short-term. So quickly, I'm going to run through these slides on what the alternatives I've identified are. There's 14. This is pretty much everything out there on the table, looking at each of these, from a fresh view. So as far as groundwater alternatives, which will again be led by EEI, we'll be looking at aquifer storage and recharge, and then also looking at the Mount Simon aquifer, which is currently deeper than the existing aquifer that we get our water from. The river alternatives, we have a number of alternatives. The Des Plaines River, which runs right through the city now. The Kankakee River, there's a number of options there for obtaining water, whether that's through the Public Water Commission or through a plant to be constructed by the city on existing property. Also looking at the Fox River and the Illinois River. And then also looking at the Lake Michigan alternatives, which will be led by Stantec. And again, there's a number of agencies where we could purchase water from, directly from City of Chicago to DuPage Water Commission, Illinois American, Hammond, Indiana, and Oaklawn. So this is a very big decision to make, lots of options, and how do we go through this process so that we at the end come up with a solution that everyone feels comfortable, that was unbiased and was truly in the best interest of the city. So we are going to be using a weighted decision matrix. And so during the meetings that we hold with council and the stakeholders, we'll review these criteria and identify the factors that are of most importance, and then apply a weight to those. And so then once we do the comparing of the alternatives, then we'll report back to council.
Yeah, hold on a second.
Yeah.
What is a weighted decision matrix?
So we didn't include that, but if you say, you weight it, so if water quality.
Who weighs it?
So we would, in meetings with the stakeholders, we would meet with you and say, is governance, how important is governance? And then we would assign a weight, to that based on the input that we receive. So obviously water quality and water capacity are of most critical. So their weights would be much more significant.
I think what we need you to do, David, we may have to stop this. What we need, we know there's about 14 different options. Mm-hmm. We need you to come back with 3 or 4 viable options, the best 3, and let the public and the city council, working with the public, make a decision. I don't know what a weighted decision matrix is. I don't even know who the stakeholders are that you're referencing. Mm-hmm. I'll let you finish, but I have questions about CMT.
Sure.
They're the company who's going to get the contract, correct?
That's the recommendation.
So what is Stantec? What are they involved in?
So the CMT team, they're the prime consultant, and then within their team, they have Stantec, who does who is an expert in Lake Michigan water alternatives, and then also EEI. So
then why not award the contract to Stantec or EMI?
Because then CMT is, like I said, they are the prime consultant who they're looking at the river water alternatives.
Right, mm-hmm. And they're giving. I think we know where this is going. They have an interest in telling Joliet to get river water. That's what they do. That's what we're giving the contract to. It seems like the other companies are just window dressing, and we're going to waste $400,000 to be told go to the Kankakee River and get the water from there.
That was not the intent. Like I said, the decision-making process for the selection committee, we interviewed six firms, and each firm had multiple team members, and this approach with having multiple firms we felt would lead to the most unbiased decision-making, because there would be other firms there to champion each alternative and look at that.
They're not getting the contract. And now a weighted decision matrix means you're going to deliver a decision to us. It's you and the company with the interest is going to come back and say, here's what you need to do, Joliet. Here's what our matrix tells us to do.
No, the matrix is going to be made based on the input we receive from the council.
It's going to be made by you, not by the council. I don't agree with this process, David. I think we need to stop this, at least to review it for a couple more weeks, because I see the writing on the wall. It seems clear to me what's happening here.
Well, Mayor, let me make a few comments. I think the process has been very fair and very equitable. I think all the firms, the one thing that I was impressed with is they're all very talented, very knowledgeable in this area. In fact, all the teams really tried to accentuate how they would approach this project very objectively. And each of them recognized that their main company alone didn't have all the knowledge that they would want to bring to play because of all the myriad options we're looking at. That's why they're kind of subcontracting with these other entities that can bring more expertise, more background, things of that nature. Let me just mention on weighted. In fact, most of I think each of the companies had some way they were going to take the data they collected and how they were going to use that in some sort of decision matrix. And as an example, it's like cost. Weighted is you see this time and time again in the way that recommendations are made on vendors and contractors, because maybe cost should be given a higher rate as opposed to some other element. Those weighted decision matrix, will be shared with the council. And I think the thing that I want to stress is this is going to be a very open and public process. So there's nothing to be hidden from the public, because I think the one thing we had a lot of discussion is how do we keep this process as public oriented as possible, so that there's going to be a good track record of what we looked at, especially in the early phases, and why were certain things recommended or not. But there's going to be a lot of written documentation too. And if anything, I see this as a process that the council hopefully will be even more involved than maybe any other big project of this nature, just because it has such a long-term implication. And we're talking about a lot of money that ultimately it could cost City of Joliet in the process.
Well, here's the issue. For me, the number one factor would be sustainability. That the city cannot come back 30 years from now, say, hey, they made the wrong choice, we need to find a new source of water. It's not cost, it's what's going to last. But Councilman Turk may say it's cost. So who's to say which factor you're going to weigh more importantly? We have different opinions. CMT may have a different opinion than both of us. Who's weighing? And again, I think it's clear. If you want 3 independent viewpoints, one for Kankakee River, one for groundwater, one for Lake Michigan, then set 3 contracts out and have all 3 come back and make the case. Because the subcontractors are working for, is it CMT?
Yes.
And it's pretty clear, again, you really went over that slide quickly. If you can go back to that, the CMT team, that their interest is in Riverwater. So again, it appears, I don't want to jump the gun, but the decision's been made. This is just a formality. And I don't know why we're spending all this money then.
I mean, we want to start at ground zero. We don't want to have any of the previous studies. That's why we're spending the money. We have come into this with no preconceived notions of which option is the best option.
With all due respect, it would appear CMT does. Their extensive river water expertise with Aurora, Fox River, and Aqua Kankakee River. So, and I'm not disparaging their company, that's what they do. And you're going to tell me that they're going to come back and they're going to allow for a different recommendation than what their expertise is? Well, does anybody buy that up here? Am I the only one who feels this way?
I agree.
Well, Mayor and Council, I do want to say these are very reputable individuals. I worked with a lot of engineering consulting teams. They wouldn't be as successful as they are today if they didn't approach things and tried to be objective, professional, ethical, and to set aside any kind of professional bias they might have. You could almost make raise the same concerns with any one of each of these entities, because they all kind of had interests. Now, keep in mind, whatever they come up with.
Maybe we do it independently. Let CMT make the case for the river water, let another company make the case for Lake Michigan, let another company make the case for groundwater, and ultimately us make the decision. Not, again, I'm not disparaging the company. I don't know you, at all. I'm not saying that they're not reputable or ethical, but it seems like, again, that's their expertise. Why would they recommend something other than what they know and what they're experts in?
I would like to hear from the president of the company, and he can address that question directly to the entire council.
Thank you. My name is Bill Bailey. I'm the president of CMT. Kind of following up with what David had indicated, the intent of this project for us is to look at this, all 14 options, alternatives, basically with no particular perception in mind. Okay, yeah, our expertise is in river water alternatives. We're bringing that expertise to the table. Stantec's going to bring the Lake Michigan alternatives, and EEI is going to bring the groundwater alternatives. We're going to look at all of them, and it's the weighted decision matrix is really more about what the stakeholders, which will include the council, the public, and others, view as the most important thing. It will not be us deciding what the weights are. It will be part of team meetings that we'll have with the stakeholders to determine what those things are and what's most important to the city of Joliet. So I'm not arguing or anything. I was just indicating that's the intent of what that decision matrix is.
Question, Mayor.
Yes.
Now that you both mentioned it, please give me a list or definition of stakeholders as you guys see it from your side. of this.
Want to share who we were thinking of, Teresa?
So the intent of the stakeholder engagement is to first talk with the city council on one-on-one interviews, the mayor, the city manager, and figure out who the key people should be to what you guys feel should be involved in this process. The intent is then to form a community advisory committee that would form those key people within the community.
Excuse me, ma'am, I put together a water commission about a year ago.
Yes.
Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Because they've been meeting prior to the decision to hire you. The commission's the one who made the decision that your company or a company like yours should be hired to narrow it down so the city council can make the final choice.
And
So we want another committee on top of the committee that already exists.
And the intent would be to engage those people to see if they would want to participate in that community advisory committee, to interview the Environmental Commission people as well as any key industry, business leaders, educational leaders within the city. And then the other part of that, just to make sure that it is an unbiased approach, is to form a technical advisory committee. No one that has any ties to any of us here that would say, are you following the right path? They would be retired county people, ID&R people, IEPA people, to say, to look at it and say, is this the right thing? Once the alternatives have been looked at, to make sure that there isn't a bias. Because that was our intent in putting together this team. We could have just gone into it saying it was just CMT, but we wanted to get that fresh look for you guys and pull in those experts that would champion those alternatives.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if Allison or who you all can answer. Have this been done anywhere else where the three companies or three other companies work together for a municipality, you know, to bring back, you know, what would be the best?
I'm not familiar with, you know, I know, like I said, in Aurora, they went through this similar process a few years ago, and I'm not sure if they had, who was on their team at that point, Teresa?
But it was a team effort, like three?
As Teresa's coming up, let me just mention each of the 6 people we interviewed came with a team approach. So, you know, all those who really got in that second round, each had other individuals as part of the team.
Okay, well, that's what I'm asking. And then, well, how did it decide that CMT would be the lead team? Or, and again, I'm like, I don't know any of you, I'm just...
Well, CMT has done alternative water studies throughout Illinois. This is unique in the expanse of alternatives that were involved, and that's why we felt we needed to engage other experts in this, specifically like Michigan and groundwater. So we reached out to EEI and Stantec to join our team and come together on this project.
And again, where did the 2 new committees come from? This was never discussed, certainly not by the Environmental Committee, and not internally.
But again, this is kind of a proposal. This is some of their thoughts. Each of the committees also had different ideas about how they would get into the detail of how to move forward. What we stress to them from a high level is that we want a good public process so that the public at large felt involved, but there could be other people involved, such as the Environmental Committee, such as, you know, other interest groups that could feel like they could get involved, you know, as little or maybe at a high level, specific level. Keep in mind, these are still a proposal and a recommendation on their part. All this is subject to further refinement as part of the contract or as we go forward, especially with the council's direction.
David, what I was looking for, and I think what the Environmental Commission was looking for, they could speak for themselves, was someone to narrow this down, the different options, present the viable options, and let the people decide, through us. What really threw me off was the decision matrix. I mean, this is very subjective. I gave you an example. Me and Mike Turk could have 2 completely different opinions, doesn't mean one of us is right or one of us is wrong. But you may say, well, I agree with Mike Turk, and I think the mayor's wrong, so I'm gonna weigh his opinion. And that's not what I thought we were getting at. I thought we were gonna get a breakdown.
May I suggest, I wouldn't get hung up on that, because that is one way to look at the data, to analyze the data and try to reach some recommendations on that. It's not the sole means of making a recommendation. In fact, I've seen some of these decision matrix and that be looked at and decide, you know, that's really not as appropriate as maybe other more subjective. But again, it's a way to try to be as objective as you can, looking at the empirical data. But at the other extreme is just a very subjective and saying, you know what, irregardless of the data, I think this is the way to go. So all that continuum of decision making is up for discussion. And ultimately, if the council prefers one way over another, that can be incorporated.
And I believe we are the viable options you're looking for. That is still the intent of phase one. We are going to come back and say, these are the options that can provide a sustainable water source and is a quality water source. And then when we move into next year, there'll be much more discussion on other factors. So the process is going to be very transparent. That's why we wanted to emphasize the strategic planning component, to work with everyone up front so that we go down the path that everyone is comfortable with.
If I could also mention, not only these individuals, consultants, the Environmental Commission, and even the council, we shared with you kind of this draft request for qualification. And the intent there was to have one document that the individuals who would be responding to that had one document to look at to decide how they wanted to create their proposal. So it was that document, not to say that that is ironclad and that can't be changed, but we did need some sort of consistency from which the various companies that had an interest in submitting a statement or a proposal would follow. But they chose, each one of them decided how to respond to that. But that's the only document that they all had. And again, we shared that with the various committees and the council early on.
Yes. Couple of, first question is, whether it be CMT, Stantec, or EEI, are these strictly consulting firms? Or once we as a city come to a determination whether we want to do the river, the Lake Michigan, what have you, are they able to then bid on being the designer of that? Hundreds of millions of dollars worth of work.
Yeah, the intent would be that we would work with this team through phase one and phase two, and then when the whatever option then is selected to move forward with, then we would go out again for qualifications and select a firm then as most qualified in implementing that solution.
So they would be, all three of these companies could bid on that?
Yes.
Okay. And at this point, as preliminary as it is, there has been some discussion, and we've known about this for a couple of years now. Mm-hmm. And I was really under the general idea that it was going to be lake or river. So, we're paying quite a bit, $400,000. If it's necessary, it's necessary. What alternatives would there be? Lake or river?
You mean, so within...
The third group is about something not to do with lakes or rivers, alternative. What?
Right, so groundwater, there's an additional aquifer that's even deeper than the current aquifer that potentially could be a water source. So that is one of the additional options, as well as using aquifer recharge, where basically we try to recharge the existing aquifer using effluent from the wastewater treatment plants.
Well, just in the preliminary meetings we have, I forget the name of it, but I do recall the extra deep aquifer.
Yes.
It's too salty. We'd have to desalinate it, which I was told at that meeting when I asked about it, would be way expensive. So why are we even paying a third company to come in for something that's not realistic? It's going to be lake or river. Well,
we didn't want at any point in the future, as technologies develop, for someone to say that we did not turn over every stone and look at every option. So we felt as staff, this offered that protection that we would be evaluating every possibility. And, the information shared, there were, and Jeff can speak to this, we're at a time, communities that were getting water from the Mount Simon. So that isn't an option that we're ready to rule out at this point. That's the point of the study, is to look at those.
Councilman, if I could, I'd like to, you bring up a good point, and that is, we want to make sure in this phase 1 that there's a section on each of those alternatives, so that rather than say, well, we excluded one alternative, well, who made that decision to exclude it? And what was the basis of that? Was it a subjective decision, or was there really empirical data? And,
David,
and it may
David,
be that...
I can address that, and I would agree with the mayor. That's what the commission that was appointed was to do, that since the Jetsons' age hasn't arrived yet, let's not worry about some kind of low-cost desalination 100 years from now. I mean, if it's going to lower the amount, realistically, I was very convinced from the last meeting I went to that what's the aquifer called again?
Mount Simon.
Mount Simon is not a realistic option. So why waste money on somebody to study it?
Well, you could say the same thing about the Des Plaines River. You could say the same thing about recharge, but
I thought they had said that, to be honest. And they were focused on the Kankakee River.
Verbally, or is there anything in writing that has, whoever the author is competent, has empirical data? Some of these items may not get as much analysis. They may find very early, with very little research, to say, hey, these issues are so overcoming, but at least we'll have that written record as part of the phase 1 study to show why they were excluded, and then the decision makers, ultimately the council, can say, yes, we agree. Let's eliminate all those.
We got to watch our pennies here. Let me define stakeholder real quickly and really briefly. It will be the 150,000 residents that are going to pay this $400,000, and it's necessary to do the study, and the $300 million or above to actually build some kind of alternative source out to the river or to the lake. That's the stakeholders, not the educators, unless they live here, not the business owners, not the politicians. It's the people who live here who are going to pay that money, because we're going to raise their rates to cover it, correct?
Yes. Okay.
So, I don't need to interview, no matter how nice he or she is, a blind man to find out that you can't be a proofreader. So I thought they really explained there were no alternatives adequately at the meeting I had gone to, saying that who knows, someday it might change. How much would it take off the cost of this study to focus on what I thought had already preliminarily been determined between the river and the Kankakee River and and I think it was Kankakee River / Kankakee Des Plaines combination, and then the other option was Lake Michigan. How much are we going to spend to find out that the Jetsons haven't arrived yet?
And we have, in their proposal, there's specific costs to analyze each option. And we've already had that internal discussion that if within, the first blush look at it, it's not going to be a viable option, then we will not continue to study it. And then that money then would be reduced from the contract.
And what is the estimate on the first blush amount, as far as how much money is going to give us our first blush?
Yeah, and I think each option at that first blush is like a couple $1,000. So, we have a detailed discussion on a detailed cost for each one. So, we can look into that more closely to identify what the cost would be, just to, do the very preliminary look at it. But we just thought it was in the best interest of the city to look at every option and have information to provide to you, so that if in the future anyone in the public asked you about other alternatives, we could have a document that would say it had been investigated.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have here.
Yeah, and I think we have to be realistic. Whatever company you pick is going to have ties to someone, but this raises real flags for me. And again, I don't want to do anything publicly to denigrate you or your company. It would appear that you have a financial interest with the Kankakee or the Fox River, correct? You work with Aurora or Aqua?
I guess I can just say too, as staff, we will be also vetting this, and we as professionals are not going to be swayed just to go to river water because if it's apparent that that is not what the data is supporting.
Well, I think Councilman Hug identified, because this committee identified this a year ago. There's, I think, my opinion, there's two viable sources, the Kankakee River or Lake Michigan. The question is, how do we get it? What's the best way, the cheapest way, and the most effective way to get it? And is the river sustainable? Is the lake sustainable? Can we get the amount of water we need out of those sources? I mean, I think we've already moved the ball that far. I think what we were looking for was for the company we hire to take the 14 different proposals and narrow them down to 2 or 3, and then it's a policy decision that we need to make.
Correct, and that's what the plan is for phase 1.
Or maybe I overreacted. When I saw the matrix, it definitely threw up red flags.
It's definitely a very complex decision, and the weighted matrix, it's just one tool in the toolbox to helping make that decision. And I just want to stress again the transparency and the amount of effort that we are putting into this process of bringing in, an expert in strategic planning to help us engage in a decision that is going to be defensible and will be one that the public will support.
Mayor, if I could, though, I'd like to have the company respond to the one question you had about a possible financial interest in, what was it? Maybe just, you're going to repeat that so that they could respond to that?
Well, the slide I'm looking at says you have an expertise with Aurora and with Aqua. Aurora is a city, Aqua is a company.
Yeah, so both for City of Aurora and City of, or Aqua, Illinois, we have professional services agreements with those that are on a case-by-case basis projects, similar to how you guys have professional services agreements with other consultants. There is no financial gain in any of that, no ownership with City of Aurora or Aqua, Illinois. Right now, we do have, I believe, 2 projects with City of Aurora, neither of which involve the water treatment plant. And we have a contract with Aqua, Illinois that is ending, that was part of the water treatment plant improvements project. So, and we don't have any additional contracts with Aqua, Illinois beyond that, so.
Was that water treatment plant on the Kankakee River?
It was.
So you're an engineering firm?
Yes.
So you helped build that water plant?
We designed it, yes.
Plant.
So how would the council like us to proceed, Guy?
I'll just say the schedule that we laid out was to get started with the study in July, which would give us 6 months to prepare the initial capacity and water quality analysis. The part of it will be doing a evaluation of the groundwater model so we can further predict how much time we have, but time is always of the essence with determining the water source.
Well, I don't know about anybody else, but I just don't feel a groundwater alternative is feasible at this time. I mean, we already have, how many committees? How many committees do we have? How many committees do we need? I mean, the more committees you have, the more confused people get. It should be a transparent process. However, it can be transparent as much as we want, but making more committees is just going to confuse things more for me, and I'm sure the public as well. I would suggest taking off the groundwater and just moving with the river or the lake. And that's just my opinion.
I disagree. I believe in following the professional here with Ellison's recommendation to hear all 3 of them from professionals on whether or not it is feasible to bring that water to us.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes.
I certainly agree with Councilman Mudrin. I think I would love to have the whole picture and to see whether or not what is beneficial and most cost-effective for us. And doing that, I think we need the transparency, and I believe we need all involved, the team involved. So I'm leaning that way.
Mayor, excuse me.
Yes.
Didn't the one committee already say that the groundwater wasn't an option? So there's a committee right there that already eliminated that. So we're gonna do it again?
I don't believe this was presented to the Environmental Commission. The details that were presented to the Environmental Commission were the RFQ, and that was reviewed by them, but there's not been a discussion has not been fully analyzed to present that information.
Is that accurate, Councilman?
Allison, well, she made a good point. There's so many committees, subcommittees, commissions
Right.
that want to be developed. You know, I don't know, maybe there's one in Washington working on this right now. What was the one I attended downstairs in the planning? And we had some experts from the state there, the state, what do you call it?
Illinois State Water Survey.
right? And they said it's not an option. They said, go and look at it, but no, it's not going to happen. Name me one community our size that has existed on groundwater only. They couldn't. They said at the time, it's not realistic. I want to know how much we're going to spend to find out what we already know. That's what I want to know.
Mayor, Krista wants to make a comment.
I just wanted to remind you that this is on tomorrow night's agenda under award of contracts, Council Memo 337-18, so it is an option to table it at tomorrow's meeting as well.
Thanks. Councilman Hogg, if you wanted to hear more about the Mount Simon, Jeff.
Currently, I think Joliet is one of the largest communities in the state that's 100% groundwater. Rockford currently is 100% Rockford. Honestly, I'm not sure what their population is compared to yours, but it is a pretty large community. As far as the Mount Simon goes, there are communities that are withdrawing from the Mount Simon. The village of South Elgin has a couple wells in the Mount Simon. The city of Elgin actually has several wells that are not only open to the same aquifers that you're open to, but the Mount Simon as well. The wells are open to all those aquifers going down. And then up north in Bolo, it's my understanding that there's a Mount Simon well in use up there too. The one thing to think about maybe with the groundwater is, in any of these alternatives, is probably not just one that might be the 100% solution. There might be hybrid solutions, meaning if you go river water, there may be circumstances where you need a backup supply. And groundwater is a very viable backup supply to river water if, in a drought, for instance, withdrawal from the river is an issue.
And with the lake, that probably wouldn't be an issue, right? Generally speaking.
Well, with the lake, you'll most likely have to have backup as well. And the reason why is not because the lake is drying up, but because of the transmission of that water from the lake to Joliet or any other communities becomes challenged. Water demand's too high, there's a big water main break, you may not be able to get water to you, and you may not have the ability to store enough water within city confines to be able to supply that water. So most communities actually that are connected to, or at least a lot of them, to Lake Michigan water do have wells that they have the ability to turn on should they have a service disruption on the Lake Michigan supply. So again, our whole point here is to look at each one, determine them independently, but also in combination, because that may end up being the most viable alternative as several of them.
Here.
Yes.
I don't know if this question is for David or for Allison, but you know, we did establish, or the mayor did establish, the environmental committee. Has this been brought to them? Are they aware of this?
So we met with the Environmental Commission last Wednesday, and we did present the CMT team to them. We actually have a joint meeting tomorrow with the Public Service Committee and the Environmental Commission to go through this same presentation with them.
So they haven't seen it as of this point?
They've not seen this presentation, but when we met with them last week, we did present the CMT team, and they were involved in development of the RFQ, which identified the phasing and the options that would be studied.
And I don't know if I quite got, Councilman Hogg had asked a question, I'm not sure if I got the answer to it, but it was a good question, was if we go through this process and let's say, you know, hypothetically, we say, hey, Lake Michigan is the direction we want to go.
Right.
Does CMT fall out of the process, and then Stantec is now engineering this, you know, because there's going to be a lot of of engineering going on, a lot of development going on. Is that what would happen, or how does that work?
So, like I said, with phase 1 and phase 2, we'd be working with this team. Then when we moved on to subsequent phases into the actual design of the solution, we would issue another request for qualification, and then it'd be open
for
to new engineering firm, and then it would be open. We'd go through the same process again of evaluating. It could be another team, it could be one firm that specializes in that solution. As Jeff mentioned, probably the ultimate solution is going to be a combination of sources. So. We would expect probably to have another teaming opportunity, but there is no intent that this contract for that design would then just be given to the CMT team. It would be put out to the public for RFQs.
Yeah, real quick, David, would you consider, I mean, based on that, and maybe this is fair, that if the contract's awarded, that these three companies cannot bid on the final contract then? That would seem to be a safeguard that we're gonna get a fair representation, that it won't be serving anyone's own interest. Yes.
Well, let me just say, I'm not sure that I've ever seen an experience where you would tell one firm that did your phase one, they couldn't get into phase three, the construction. Keep in mind, we're going to be looking for something totally different. Phase three is going to be the design of the construction. And depending upon whether we go with Lake Michigan through the easterly route versus through Chicago, through American Water, there's all these issues that will come into play, and that will be basically part of the RFP where we want the expertise to help us with whatever is going to be the preferred route. And so I don't know, I'm trying to get an idea, what are we trying to prevent? Because again, they may not have the skill set, but if they do, we are going to go through an entirely new process. And keep in mind, we have had probably hundreds of consulting engineer contracts with many, many companies, some of which we continue to deal with time and time again, but we haven't prevented them from coming back and doing more work. Because it's, this is what they do. And, it's something that we're always looking for is how are their other clients viewed their service. So. But, that could be one of the things. I'm just trying to understand, what are we trying to avoid?
Conflict.
Pardon?
Conflict. A conflict of interest. That the company making the recommendation, steering the city in a certain route, is also going to get the ultimate contract to build whatever it is that they recommend. And again, this isn't isolated with CMP. Any company you pick would probably be in the same situation. But it seems obvious to me that it's right for that conflict. You're asking these groups to make the decision and then turn around and presumably they're going to bid on the work.
I mean, again, the decision ultimately will come to the council, and all we will be providing is which options are viable and during this first phase. And the second phase then will further refine that information to provide to you so you can make the best decision.
I'm completely on board with phase one. That's what I thought this was going to be. Right. The phase two definitely set off some alarm bells. Sitting here tonight, it's the first time I've heard it, so maybe I didn't mean to overreact publicly, but
that's fine.
But it's always been in the document we've shared with you.
Yeah,
and phase two just takes all those long lists and just does the detail on 3 or 4 as quickly as we can to bring back. So again, that hasn't changed.
Well, and having said that, I do think that time is of the essence. You used a 2015 study saying 15 to 30 years. We have subsequent studies saying 5 to 10 years. They may be alarmist, but there are more modern studies than what you cited when you started this.
Yeah, and that was from the Illinois State Water Survey. They put in a worst case scenario, which had growth resuming the early 2000 levels, which we understand could be realistic and something we have to be prepared for. So as part of this phase one study, we'll be looking at developing a short-term emergency plan of how we would address that. And in addition, we are working with the Illinois State Water Survey. They are on this team, and we will be providing them with refined demand projections, as well as information on withdrawals from the region. And with that more specific information than the general information they've been using, we will actually run the model for our specific situation so that we can have that number be better defined, because it is 15 to 30 is a wide range. And with the worst case scenario, 5 to 10, that's something that we really need to get our finger on, is what is that number?
Yes.
And I won't belabor the point with this third option thing that I've been discussing, folks. and I appreciate your response, but it was more confusing than you realize. Our water system, whatever we depend on, is drying up.
Right.
5 years to 30 years, depending on who you think of. I asked, give me a community our size or larger that uses it successfully, and you told me Joliet uses it. That is the most bizarre circle of logic I've ever seen in a long time. We're drying up, but we're an example of how you can use it. We're drying up.
Sorry, I suggested Rockford as well.
Right, but you know, I mean, and I don't know what their problems with it, but that just completely floored me. You know, we're here only because we're considering CMT, Stantec, and yourselves, because our groundwater deep well is drying up. And then to use us as an example, that throws me off. That was a detail that didn't get past me. It didn't make sense.
So can you clarify what the question was? What other towns are reliant upon the deep aquifer?
No, Allison, my whole statement was premised on, we already preliminarily were told that groundwater and deep wells are not going to be an option in this case. Okay. Can you give me an example of another city that has used it successfully?
As the alternative source.
Right.
Right.
You mentioned Joliet and Rockford and...
Yeah. No, I mean, I can understand that answer did not respond to that question. I think, as Jeff mentioned.
Allison, I got a flat tire in my minivan outside. I'm going to replace it with a flat tire.
Yes.
That's on it.
I think we were not thinking as the alternative waters. He was listing existing, so we understand.
So why are we, then back to my original question, why are we considering something that obviously, to an amateur like myself, having attended that meeting, the conclusive meeting, has already been ruled out informally?
Well, again, as the backup, as the potential backup source, and it's not going to be, we don't anticipate this is going to be one alternative source. It's going to be a number of sources that we're going to have to consider as the ultimate solution. So, and that's why groundwater is important, to continue to look at the aquifer recharge and the Mount Simon.
Questions, comments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is a presentation regarding the Chicago Street Corridor Plan. Director of Planning, Michael Shores, is here to present that.
Thank you. I'm just going to keep this very brief. There's a few slides I'd like to just give you an overview on. Most of you recall that about a year ago, we stepped off, the mayor was there. We had a kickoff meeting at the new Joliet Junior College building. We had all of the stakeholder groups that you can think of downtown, and I won't try to list all of them. They're all listed in this document. But this tonight is the culmination of a year and a half of work between all of the groups that we involved, that I mentioned. If you could, Krista, we're going to focus on this slide for just a minute, and then, I guess I can do it. Hopefully this works. I'm going to go through a couple slides. First of all, I mentioned, I'm not going to try to read all these, but you can see the list here on page 2 of the final document, all the different groups that we involved in this project. We have some outstanding consultants that helped us with this plan, first and foremost, Ginkgo Design Group, Ginkgo Planning and Design, with their sub-consultant team. Were great people to work with. And we also had downtown businesses, downtown restaurants. We had different organizations, University of St. Francis, Joliet Junior College, the library, the Rialto, the Route 66 organization. So you can see here just the list of individuals that were involved. And what I'll do, you've seen this once before. I'm not going to go through all their slides, but just for those in the audience or on TV might want to recall, this is a project that involves two things. It's the redesign of the streetscape of Chicago Street from Ruby Street on the north to Washington Street on the south. It's about 11.5 blocks. The other component that the city added into the project early on was also the redesign or the creation of a new green space downtown, and that is the square across from the Rialto Theater. And go into just a few more. This is an important slide here. You can see, and it's a little bit off. I don't know why it's not letting me scroll back down. But step 1 is where we are now. This is a concept. This is not the final design. There will still be opportunities for the public and for the stakeholder groups that I mentioned earlier, as well as the council, to finalize some of the details. The next phase, if we hopefully can budget that for this coming budget cycle, would be a design development where we get into the details of what colors things are, what materials, the actual kind of the fun part of the design. This concept is very, lays out some of the rooms and uses for the space, the plaza space, but it doesn't get into the details, and that would be the next phase. And then finally, what we do, like we did do any other road project or public project, we would get into phase 1 engineering and design documents, actual blueprints that can be used to construct the project. So again, this is a proposed new urban square to have downtown events. You can see from the images all the successful events we have. We just had the Rock the Block this weekend. We've had between 9,000 and 10,000 people down here in the past for other events such as Star Wars Day, Race Fan Rally, New Orleans North, so on and so forth, Fiesta in La Calle, Festival of Lights Parade. So this is sort of formalizing that space to be the special, one of the most special places in Joliet. I'm just going to go through a couple more, and then the rest of the document I'll mention is online. So this is the slide that shows the rooms that were created in the space based on some of the surrounding buildings and uses. We have the main part of the area is a green space. Downtown is mostly paved, mostly parking lots or buildings. And so this creates a green space in the downtown, and it remains to be seen whether we would do real grass or maybe turf. Some successful urban parks do have the turf component. We also have what's called a red carpet area that's leading from the Rialto into the space. I think one of the early ideas is to have illuminated stones so that it looks almost like lit up at night. And that whole block would be, the reconstruction of that block would take place most likely as part of the plaza space. And then you've got the stage area, which could serve during the day as a place for students to congregate. You've also got a curtain area, which is a green landscape area, a screen, if you will, to hide the parking garage. And then the library garden, where is presently the library parking lot, is a space where young people can have a storyteller corner. There might be a climbing structure, something that really grabs your attention for Route 66 travelers. And this is looking down in plan view at the space. Most of you have seen this concept. We have Van Buren Street extended, and it becomes a T turnaround for just a few parking spaces go back on Van Buren Street where the fountain is located currently. And then in front of in the block where the Rialto is, the entire intersection is raised up, sort of like downtown Plainfield did, where you raise the intersection. It slows traffic. It creates a special surface where maybe a marching band would stop and perform. It's kind of the centerpiece of the streetscape. You've also got a service alley. It's not quite a public street, but it's an alley along the parking garage between the green space. And then you've got these different dividers, seating nooks around the space. We haven't gotten into any of the details about what could go here as far as some iconic piece of art. People think of the Bean. This plaza is roughly the scale of Millennium where the Bean is located. Obviously the Bean was quite expensive. We would probably down the road want to commission a large public art piece, and that could be maybe with naming rights. So there's different ways to sponsor some of the, especially Route 66 as a theme here, where people would stop, take photographs. We want them to get out of their car and actually make this a must-stop destination for people traveling through Joliet. I won't go into all the details on the rooms. I'm going to fly through these if it's okay. And this is just another 3D rendering looking from the library rooftop looking south, showing the green space. And then at night, there's some beautiful imagery here at how the park could be illuminated at night, as well as the buildings around it uplit at night. Go through a lot. They have a lot of graphics, 3D graphics in here showing, for example, this is the splash pad that they propose. It would just be a zero surface, and when there was an event, it would be shut off and dried. And during the day, it could be running, and it's almost a fountain, but you can splash through it. You can't bathe in it. It could also be an ice rink in the winter for small skating events. And this is a view from the stage platform area looking into this green space. And it's just a simple arbor. At this point, the concept is just a simple arbor structure to kind of cover, create a covering. And this is at the end where the storyteller's corner would be located. some of the sitting structures, they're showing some swings, but this could be library books that you can climb on. And then going past all the pretty pictures, there's lots of pictures of other places around the country in the final plan document. These are, one of my favorites was all the input we had at the April 18th public hearing, or public meeting. We had there were kids there were people from the community that really care about downtown, and it was really well attended. We were happy with the turnout. And then the final thing I want to touch on, the streetscape is, although the plaza, the square, is gets a lot of attention, the street itself is 4 decades old. It curves, it meanders. When in the late 70s, early 80s, whenever the street was turned into a ped mall, it basically has this curvature to it. It widened a lot of the sidewalks, and that's great, but the curvature in the street, the meandering back and forth, really takes away on-street parking. So we don't have a number because they haven't gone into engineering. Every block's going to be different, but straightening out Chicago Street will add a lot of parking back on the street that would be lost otherwise through such as the library parking lot. And here's just an example of one block in front of the library that gets straightened out. It has a room for possibly a potential shared bike lane where we would stripe the street so that bicyclists could also use the road. We didn't have enough room, unfortunately, to have a separate bike lane, but we felt it was more important to keep the sidewalks wide in front of the storefronts. And the bottom of the picture there shows the European style of outdoor seating, where the seating is pulled away from the storefronts, and you have people walking along the glass looking in the storefronts, as opposed to having the seating area right up against the glass, where it's kind of an obstruction to people walking down the sidewalk. These planters could be decorative, they could be simple pipe railings, or they could be very ornate with Route 66 logos. Those are all the details we would get into in the next phase. And this finally shows some of the greenery. A lot of the trees are beyond their life cycle. The proposal is to put new trees and planters back in along the street at regular intervals in between the seating areas. And then those green spaces could be, the trees would be thin enough to give some shade, but I guess thin enough that you would see the beautiful architecture, the buildings. The trees you have today are just too thick, and they haven't been, they really don't do, they're not great for a retail street or restaurant streetscape. And the last thing is go through a lot of the imagery that they provided, some examples of public art. There's also a need for public wayfinding. We might this summer actually come up with just a prototype to try and get something going. People are telling me, I'm getting concerns about, how they find new visitors, finding places, coming to and from the train. So even though this would be a city downtown effort, a downtown-wide effort to work with the city center and come up with some appropriate scale signage and color schemes and that kind of thing, we think there might be a desire even sooner than doing a whole wayfinding process, just to purchase a couple kiosks and get some signs put in so people know where the restaurants are if they're coming from out of town. And as you can see at the bottom, there's another 3D image looking from a different direction. There were some cost opinions in this project. I think that's very important to hit on. The total cost of just the plaza area, the square, is in the range of anywhere on the low end from 4.4 million to 7.4 million. The cost estimate for the streetscape project in total, and it wouldn't be done at once, most likely it would be a block by block approach to redoing the streetscape, is roughly 1 million per block. So we have 11.5 blocks, so it's about $11.5 million estimate for Chicago to Ruby. Again, doesn't necessarily have to be done, probably can't be done all at once, probably a phased approach. And we also, like I said, mentioned briefly about public art, large iconic pieces, sculptures, things that people would really want to take a picture of. Those are expensive, but you could have a juried commission, an appointed commission, do that. And there might be opportunities, like I said, for naming rights on some of those. And the last thing I'll mention in the appendix, the appendix itself is 30-some pages. The plan document is all on the website right now. Anybody can go look at it on the Planning Division webpage. There were some early concepts thrown out there I won't go into, but those are all, we wanted everything preserved in the appendix of the document. So early concepts and themes are provided, all the forms and community feedback that we got, a lot of positive feedback. and then all of the existing exhibits showing the street itself. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and we look forward to continued support from the council and the mayor and also all the groups I mentioned moving forward into the design development phase. This is going to be a really fun project.
Questions, comments?
And then I should just mention tomorrow night we're asking for approval of the resolution that supports the plan as a policy document. But again, it's a concept, and at any time as we get into details and dollar amounts, we can kind of tweak and modify as needed. So this is a general support of the project, of the concepts that were set forth in that document.
Thank you.
Mayor and Council, I just wanted to make one other comment. This is looking down the road. I just wanted to make sure and clarify that everyone understands that the current Phase 3 engineering work that is preparing the construction drawings and specifications is only for that block from Washington to Jefferson. And that's what will be ready for construction next summer. If anyone was thinking, well, will we be ready to go from Jefferson to Clinton, including the plaza, there is no work currently under contract to design that for construction next summer. Now, I bring that to you if the council did want to have as one of these goals to try and get all the way up to Clinton, as well as work on the plaza. That's currently not under contract. So I just wanted to clarify and make sure everyone understands what we're on track for construction activity next summer. So, thank you.
Yes.
David, will the TIF be, the downtown TIF be, over the years, paying for any of this?
I don't know. That remains to be seen as to whether, what the projected revenue could be and how much of that is not obligated. So to have to ask not only Steve Jones, but Jim Gadotti to research that and come back with a best guess as to whether or not, how much TIF could be generated based on the current state of affair of the equalized evaluation and what could possibly happen in the future.
And it was noted, I think that this said there's quite a bit of community input. How was community input sought up to this point?
For the Chicago Street Corridor Plan? Yeah. Well, as indicated, and to my knowledge, there was this community stakeholder group, which I think had a couple of meetings. And then there was the public presentation at the Historical Museum back in, I think it was April. Those are the only two I'm aware of, public events.
Yeah, we had, as David indicated, there was an advisory committee made up of a broad cross-section of downtown interest groups, public and private, as well as we had the two advisory committee meetings. The third, if you will, was the public forum on April 18th, and that was done through press release. We did a press release. We had
maybe 50, 60.
Oh, there was probably 75 to 90, I would say. The room, I counted 75, but I know some people were coming and going, so it was pretty good. I think that was a night too where the weather wasn't the greatest, but we did have a really good turnout. And the feedback, we've had this project webpage running for some time, and I'll just remind everyone watching on the City of Joliet website, cityofjoliet.info. If you go in the search bar, you can just type in Chicago Street. It will take you right to all of the past documents that we've had through this project, through this process.
Yeah, I mean, just the reason I ask that is, so often we throw around the term stakeholder. And again, this is preliminarily and conceptually a $15 million project, and we're making some good progress downtown. If you want the entire city to come to and be proud of their downtown, they're the stakeholders. They're paying the $15 million. From east to west, from north to south, there has to be an effort, not the same group of 250 people who have an interest, if you will, in downtown, but all of the citizens. It's a big ticket item. And they're the most important stakeholders because all of what we talk about comes out of their pocket, not out of the business owners who may not live in Joliet. These are the residents. And so I'm not aware of any outreach out to my district, for instance, other districts, if people start getting mailers or something, at some point they need to, and early on, and I think Jim Trisna, I'll drag you into this conversation, quite a bit we get, and I think, John, so do you, when they have problems in neighborhoods, especially the wider streets, they ask for speed bumps and speed tables, and we've always been telling them for years, city policy is not to put them in. I see we're proposing them here. I don't know that we can do that. We can't make an exception, even if it's supposed to be decorative. I get the decorative intersections, and I'm sure they'll be beautiful. It says speed table, and that's maybe to other people. I don't know if it's a big issue. I hope I ask Mike. People are asking for speed bumps and speed tables, and if it's good enough for downtown, they're going to want it out there in their subdivisions, which means a complete retooling of the current city procedure that most cities follow, which is no speed bumps or speed tables. Just a little input ahead of time.
And if I could just real briefly respond to that. The raised block, if you will, a half block in front of the Rialto, the purpose was to eliminate the curbs so that you would essentially flow between the Rialto across that brickwork into the plaza, almost a continuous space. And it would be a very subtle, it wouldn't be like the small, bumps or humps that you have to slow traffic. This really, it would slow traffic, but it's not intended to be it has a couple of purposes. It slows traffic, but it also creates that special place that you're trying to create as far as...
Which goes against our established policy that we've been telling people for a decade. So, making it nice for the Rialto is nice. It's a nice thought. But then how do I say no? How does John say no? How does the at-large say no to residents further out from the downtown saying, I'm afraid my child's gonna get run over? Even though we know it won't solve it, we tell them the policy is no speed bumps or speed tables. So it's something that's got to be considered, and it's best to be brought up now when it's still conceptual, as opposed to after the plan's been solidified. Yes.
I've had requests for speed bumps
too. Thank you.
I just don't know.
Right. So we don't want to set that precedent.
I'm sure we probably have 6 foot speed bumps.
That concludes the 2 presentations, Madam City Clerk.
Next is citizens to be heard on agenda items. Is there anyone present that would like to speak on an agenda item this evening? Seeing none, we'll pass it to the city manager to discuss the items for tomorrow night's agenda.
I'm going to jump down to the consent agenda. And after some routine matters on approval of minutes, invoices, I do want to just draw your attention that it is proposed that we will hold a combined council meeting on Monday, July 2nd, 2018 at 5:30 p.m. at the Billy Limemocker Bicentennial Park. So just want to share that with you, and that's in part, as you may recall, due to the elevator repairs here in this building. Included is a copy of the 2017 Annual Treasurer's Report, which is tied in with the year-end financial audit, financial statements for your review. Position vacancies, we have seeking authority to fill 1 new entry-level patrol officer, 2 sergeants due to retirement, and 1 water equipment operator 2. So there's basically 4 full-time positions included in that item. There's no other questions on the consent agenda. Moving on to the licenses and permit, Council Memo 31618. It is recommended by the Public Works Department that the application be approved for a drive-through permit for a Circle K car wash at 3021 Plainfield Road. You may recall previous council action. This is a expanded and redevelopment of the Circle K out of that location. On public hearing, there is a recommendation that Council Memo 31718 be tabled. This is a First Amendment to an annexation agreement to extend the expiration date for an additional 20 years located at 240 Zurich Road. Moving down to ordinances, the first ordinance, Council Memo 31918, This is a ordinance approving a resolution or denying a variation of use to allow the continuation of a 2-unit, an R3, 1 and 2 family use in an R2 single family zoning district located at 613 North William Street. Now, we did receive just a request from the applicant's, I think, attorney, asking that this item be tabled to the next city council meeting. Is that correct?
That's correct.
It is city clerk, yeah. Just to refresh your memory, ZBA recommended denial on a 6-0 vote, and the community development staff recommended the denial. But,
wasn't this only tabled once?
Yes, so why are we tabling it again?
It's, I believe, Marty, does the council have the prerogative to table or not to table?
And it's up to them. It's the applicant's request, so you can either accept the applicant's request and table or not. I mean, the attorney's here if you want to ask him directly, but otherwise it's the council's prerogative.
But I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm just curious why. I mean, the first tabling, no problem, but we're starting to drag it out.
Nothing's changed.
He met with me this morning, so.
The attorney?
Yes.
And are you suggesting that you're in agreement with tabling based on your conversation?
Well,
it'd be good advice.
Gathering additional information, I think that's how it's put.
Okay.
Do we know why the table?
But what new information has come forward? We have everything.
There's a meeting with Kappa in the meantime since the last meeting.
That was a couple weeks ago, so they should have information on that now, if there's anything new.
Well,
but there's a letter here from Kappa opposing this, right. And I've received several phone calls as well from neighbors, and I believe there's gonna be more neighbors here tomorrow opposing this, so I'm I'm confused why we want to table it again. What new information is there? That's my question.
Well, it's just like I said, it's a request from the applicant's attorney.
Have they met with Kappa since 6/14? Since June 14th?
I don't know.
Did you get the letter there?
Yeah, we got letters from Kappa dated June 14th. So I mean, if nothing's changed.
Yeah, I don't think since June 4th, I don't think so.
We met last Monday with Kappa to discuss the matter with them. So this property has been used multifamily since the early 50s. And it was used before the city of Joliet zoning ordinance made the area R1. And it predates the 1993 Joliet ordinance amortization ordinance. So it's our position that there's this additional issue in regards to whether or not it's grandfathered in that we would like to take a look at. It's not so much that we need to take a look at, but I believe that would be incumbent upon the city to also take a look at it in order to make a wise decision when you do vote on the variance. The grandfather issue is a separate issue that would not be decided by the city, but I think it's a factor that you need to consider, because I think the facts for that outweigh the facts for the variance. I believe we have a strong case in regards to the variance because we're continuing a use that's been there since the early 50s, but also that has been grandfathered in. So that's the reason.
Okay, so if I heard you right, what you're saying is, should we vote it down, you're prepared to sue if you have the facts based on that grandfather?
Correct, but we'd like to work things out rather than going to court, so.
You know, I don't think since the 1950s it's been used as a boarding house or a flop house. It's been used as single family with leases. There's a difference. Marty, what is the ordinance and how do we delineate between flop houses? You know, boarding houses that are come and go as you please, SROs. How do we delineate?
That's something I'd have to look into.
Thank you, if you would. I appreciate it.
Well, I can answer that. We had a house back on 500 block, 600 block of Campbell, quite a few years back, and it was a boarding house, even though it was large enough to host 2 families, and it was denied.
Right.
So the precedent has been set, because the zoning was, back in the 80s, there was a blanket down zoning that any house that went for sale that was already zoned multifamily illegally, it had to be down zoned in the 80s to single family. Now, it's my understanding that this house has always been zoned for single family. It was never zoned R3, it's always been R2. And I understand that when the current owner purchased the property, it was purchased for cash and did not check the zoning because the prior owner, and I'm just going by what what's forward here. The prior owner said that, well, it's zoned single family, but you're going to have to go and get a variation or a zoning. But he said you could probably do that. Well, that's not up to that owner to say that. It was already single family, was never got the proper zoning, and when it was sold, it was originally by the owner said it was single family, but then later on it said multifamily, but later on it was listed as single family. Is that not correct? And because it was a cash deal, the bank didn't catch it, or nobody caught it.
Right. My client purchased
Correct?
it.
Did you say correct?
I'm not sure I understand your question, so I'm trying to rephrase.
With a cash deal, you just go in there and purchase it. No one has to check the zoning. But it's up to the buyer to make sure that that property is zoned for what they want.
Right. When my client purchased it, it was listed as 2-family, multi-unit.
Correct.
And
that
then
was
he
incorrect.
subsequently tried to sell it as single family, and the staff report indicates that he wasn't able to do that.
Right. When they couldn't sell it as a 2-unit, then they said, oh, it's a single family. The other owner.
The other owner?
Yeah, the other owner they purchased it from.
My understanding is that they listed it as a 2-unit, and that's how it was sold. That's my understanding.
That's not my understanding when I read the report from staff and from here. That because it was a cash deal, that's how we got around the zoning. Because if it went through the bank to get a mortgage, they would check the zoning on it and say, hey, this is not zoned properly. And then the buyer would know going in. That's how this got to the cracks.
Right, it was listed
because
as
of
a
the cash
2-unit.
deal. But that was the prior owner that listed it that way.
Right, the prior owner.
But it wasn't properly zoned that way.
But it wasn't, right, under the
It
zoning
was
ordinance.
not legally zoned that way. That's how the owner listed it, but it was not ever legally a 2-unit. And that's my.
Well, yeah, that's the question though. Was it ever legally a 2-unit? Because before the 65 Joliet zoning ordinance, it was being used as a 2-unit.
But then when the 80s came through, because it was owner occupied, they said it was single family. But when the blanket down zoning came through, anything that was sold that was not zoned properly was always to be single family. It couldn't be. That's how the whole neighborhood was. All those houses were multifamily, and then they all got down zoned to single family when other buyers came in. And that was discovered when they went through the proper channels and didn't pay cash.
Yes, I shared an Illinois Supreme Court case with Corporation Counsel that stands for the proposition that you can downzone, but when it comes to a prior use, non-conforming use, there's a balancing test. The balancing test is what benefit is it to the city in comparison to the financial difficulty or hardship to the owner. It's a balancing test. And the case I gave to Corporation Counsel dealt with a situation where the city downzoned zoning, allowing 4 roomers in a house to 2 roomers in a house. And the Supreme Court looked at that and said there's no real benefit to the city here, but there's a loss to the owner. And therefore, the city's amortization ordinance is invalid applied to this particular case. And under the case law, each particular case is, you look at the facts of each case. And in this case, we believe the facts would show that it's a grandfathered use. that the down zoning would not apply to this property. Because what benefit is it to the city in terms of whether this is a 2-unit or 1-unit? Because from the street, it looks like a 1-unit. And there'd be a cost to the owner because you can't simply go into the house and there's a door going up and a door going down. In this particular case, you've got stairs to the top story and, you know, entryway into the first story. So you'd have to build some sort of internal staircase. In order to do that, you'd have to, you know, building permits. You might have to get a structural engineer to determine where it's supposed to be at. So that's something that I think would benefit the city if we could take a look at how it would affect the city and the costs that would incur to the owner of the property, so you can do the balancing test.
Well, as you said, it is a single family from the street. It originally was built as a single family. Having said that, what about the detriment to the neighbors that live there? They have a vested interest in their homes. Those are single family homes, majority of them. And with 8 different people living there, coming and going at all hours, that to me, that seems to be a detriment to those folks, and those are the stakeholders that live there. So sometimes you have to look at the whole picture and not just what's best for the city. Sometimes this is better for what the neighbors that have invested there, and that's just my opinion.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we'll move on unless... Next is Council Memo number 320-18. We have 3 ordinances regarding the Catone Business Center, the revised preliminary plan, final plan, and recording plan. Planning Commission recommended approval on a 7-0 vote, and Community Development staff also recommends approval. Move on. The next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items, and I'll mention each, went before the Land Use and Legislative Committee, all with positive recommendations for approval. I'll start first, 321-18. This is an ordinance that would prohibit the feeding of wild animals and waterfowl. Excluded from this ordinance is wild bird feeding. Is there any questions on that? And again, you'll hear the Land Use Committee's report tomorrow night, unless you have asked.
I got a very direct email about this today. Marty, have you reviewed the ordinance, and do you have any recommendations regarding this?
I think it'd be a good fit to address the issues that have cropped up.
Is this a citywide issue, or is this limited because of the problems in one neighborhood?
I think there's actually 2 issues now, one in one side of the city and one in another part of the city.
And out west, we've gotten more than one complaint about the feeding of wildfowl. However, there's one situation that is like completely off the map. My question would be, we're prohibiting wildfowl. Isn't wildfowl a wild bird? And didn't we just say we're exempting wild bird feeding? Isn't that contradictory, or do I not understand the wording of the law?
Well, it's it's actually allowing the bird feeders and that type of thing.
Okay.
This.
So Marty, just to be clear, I mean, if a person has, and I know a lot of people do this, they have a bird feeder, that will be allowable under this ordinance. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Well, could it be on the ground as opposed to in a tree? Because now we're getting back to the same situation we already have. 150 ducks coming up to feed out of a ground feeder.
Elevated bird feeders are what are...
What does elevated mean? A foot? 12 feet?
Elevated, as opposed to scattering on the ground.
So you can have an automatic feeder that far off the ground, elevated, and the ducks can come feed that off that automatic dispenser, and you're still bringing the same amount of ducks to the same area. And let's be frank, the biggest complaints are coming from hundreds of fowl.
Right. Well, a well-maintained elevated bird feeder, a feeder which generally protects seed against the weather. Those are those ones with the covers.
I'm just looking for loopholes before somebody else finds loopholes. Because, you know, we've been working at this for quite a while.
Yes, we have.
Just want to make sure that the very situation that illuminated this is not going to be a loophole based on that.
So to address your exact concern, that may fall under subsection C, which is feeding wild animals in such a way that it disturbs the property of another. So there's other ways to.
Okay.
We tried to write all those in. We analyzed it for I think 3 years.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move on. Council Memo 3/2218. This is an ordinance that would institute public nuisance type regulations on abandoned gasoline service stations. This, together with several of these, have originated because of some complaints. But as you'll see, there's various conditions that would have to be met before for abandoned gas stations that exceed certain timeframes as listed in the ordinance. Any questions on this ordinance?
David, there's an old gas station at the corner of Theodore and Clement Street, I think it is. And it's been there for years. Now there's a chain link fence around it. Is there any status update on that?
I'm not familiar with that particular case. Mike, you?
If my memory is correct, it was within the last year. I couldn't pin down the month, but within the last year, that property came through for several variations related to a new gas station development, a redevelopment where they would. I think they needed variances on perimeter landscaping and that sort of thing, but no permits to my knowledge. I have not seen that project come back.
There's been a heavy equipment sitting up there for about 2 months now, so I don't know if they intend to demolish it or what. You haven't heard of it?
No, I'd have to check with our inspection staff. I haven't heard anything as far as actual permit activity.
If possible, could you give us an update tomorrow?
Yeah, I'll look at it.
Any other questions?
You know, I just wanted to follow up with that, giving us an update on that, because we haven't seen any movement. We got a little excited. We saw some equipment come in. We thought it was going to be, but it's just sitting. So yeah, if you could follow up with that. And one other question, how long are we allowing someone to come in if they say they want to do a project? And do we give them a time limit to get started to completion, from start to completion, or are we just taking their word for that one day I'm going to build something here? Just a question. David, well.
Yeah, Marty, do you know if does it have a time limit on how long for them to perform?
6 months, maybe.
Yeah, because there's a number of projects that we have that are supposed to be taking off, and nothing's happening here. Right. We need to, you know, if these people are going to build here, they need to get going.
So the issue is the current codes, in order to, you know, you've seen them before where the city declares a certain property a nuisance, and then we can go in and demolish it. That process takes generally years. So what this essentially does is kind of shortcuts that process and closes the window. So it's a period of 6 months.
6 months. Okay. All right, thank you.
Mayor?
Yes.
So if nothing's happened in 6 months, then what's the city's options at that point?
So then notify the owner that within 90 days you have to A, put it back in service, basically bring the building back into compliance, raise the structure, make an appropriate application to the city for zoning change.
Okay. Because I think there's several out there. It's been more than 6 months now.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Any other questions, comments on this? Moving on, Council Memo 32318 is an ordinance that would prohibit vehicle parking on private property, and more specifically, I think not only would vehicles be banned from parking in the front yard, I think that's one of the primary complaints that issues have arisen, but I think that's and it would also help ensure that instead of addressing this through property maintenance violation, it would be addressed under a parking violation. So that's where a parking violation would be issued for vehicle parking in front yards of vehicles in general. Any questions on this ordinance?
Well, I hate to echo Larry, but when we talk about loopholes, not the previous city manager, 2 city managers ago, when we passed the ordinance about on-street parking during snowstorms, he encouraged people publicly to park on their front lawn to get your car off the street. There's many neighborhoods that don't have driveways. So it's a loophole here. What do we tell people in neighborhoods where there is no parking other than on-street parking? How do they get their car off the street during a snowstorm?
My response to that, if the city were to drive by and see a car parked in the grass, we would have to do some serious investigation to make a determination of what is actually under it, grass or, I mean, you'd essentially have to, the city would have to go onto the property, then dig underneath the snow and then find out, oh, it's grass, and then write a ticket, and I just don't see, well, I don't see that as, I see that as not, probably not happening. So.
Does it say grass or private property?
No, I'm just saying you can park it if it's on, if your entire front yard is paved, you can park on it. But if it's grass, you can't. So if there's, you have to get the car off the street to plow, then presumably there's snow on the ground, and you have to make a determination of what's underneath the surface.
More snow.
Yes, that land use
There are some potential issues. There's issues with everything. There's attorneys, they can find loopholes to everything.
Terry, what's happening over there on your committee?
Well, we discussed this at length, and is Bob still here? He thinks good. He thinks that I don't like it because I can't park my hearse in front of the funeral home, but that's not true. But I just thought that it was, a situation where some people don't have adequate parking, and they may have to do it for a short period of time. I mean, I guess. But the committee, we discussed it at length, and I did cave in and agree that overall, for the good of the city, I think it's good. But I just thought, and then Marty did mention, that the police would take, what word should I use, Marty? Discretion. Thank you, man. On, when to write the ticket and when not to write the ticket. So when I do park the hearse in front of the funeral home, they won't write the ticket on the grass, hopefully.
That's quite a vehicle, too. I drove by and saw that.
So that was the reason why, Don and Jan looked at me, because we did discuss this at length about that. And again, we did agree to pass it on to the council.
Well, I wouldn't think, Councilman, your hearse shouldn't be an issue. I hear it's such a cool vehicle. People are dying to get in it.
Well,
oh, wow.
Only Mary.
Then I'm fine.
So we're discussing more tomorrow.
Well, just to add to that, there's been a concern where people have like 5 or 6 cars now per household, and there's just not enough room to park them. So they're starting to park them on the front lawn because Dad needs to go to work in the morning, and the kids are coming in late and blocking the driveway or whatever. So that's why it's become such an issue lately. A lot of cars parked in front lawns. But believe me, we did discuss it at length.
Moving on, Council Memo 32418. This is an ordinance that, among other things, would add tobacco to our liquor and tobacco code. This is also adding a liquor license for, let's see, I'm trying to look at, what was that area? I'm trying to think. Anyway, but the deputy liquor commissioners, as part of their ongoing enforcement, have brought forth these ordinance revisions to help them deal with the advent and violations, some of the challenges they're having with tobacco retailers, and also vaping, I think, is included now as part of the regulation that they can also enforce. But this also comes with a positive recommendation for approval from the Land Use and Legislative Committee. Any question?
Question, Mayor?
Yes.
So who's recommending this to us? Is the police having a problem here? The deputy liquor commissioners don't do anything with tobacco today. Why are they going to do this in the future?
God, Marty, do you want to?
That's the issue, is there aren't any regulations.
Okay. Why should there be?
That's the question. That's why there's a proposed ordinance.
Well, the proposed ordinance on tobacco is now being tied in with the movie theater and golf courses. So there's three parts to this that are all distinct from each other.
And that one part too was, yeah, you'd have a specific liquor license that would allow alcohol consumption in movie theaters, or they could apply for such a license.
Okay.
Okay, moving on, Council Memo 32518. This is an ordinance that would require that video gaming distributors be subject to a per gaming machine fee. And that fee would be, let's see, I believe is it, Marty, I think it would be $100 per terminal, or I thought it was a little higher.
It's $100 per month.
$100 per terminal per month.
Per month.
Okay, yeah. The city of Aurora currently has a similar ordinance. So this came forward with a positive recommendation once again from the Land Use Committee. Any questions?
David, just to clarify on that, the distributors are not the local operators. These
Correct.
are out-of-town distributors.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Local operators don't get affected by this?
Not this particular one. I think they're already, a fee is imposed at the operator level on a per video gaming license, so.
Thank you.
A quick question, Mayor.
Yes.
But is it not possible that, you know, the distributor will pass on to our local retailers?
I assume that's, yeah, a possibility.
I thought that the revenues are broken down by state statute, Marty. That's pretty clear who gets what percentage of the gaming revenue.
I think that's the after. I mean, after someone is at the machine itself.
But you're correct. You know, state law does allocate a portion of the revenue from the state keeps part, and then ultimately municipalities get part. And then after that, I think many cities began to levy a per video gaming machine license fee, which Joliet has done. So this would be an additional, but only applicable to the distributors of those video gaming machines.
Yeah, if you look at the number, the local share is not much, and it undercuts the riverboats. We do better with people being customer on the boats than we do with these individual machines. So certainly we can't stop it, it's all around us, but I support this. I think it's a smart ordinance.
Moving on, this last council ordinance would authorize payment of the very first payment to the Will County for the city's share as per an existing intergovernmental agreement of $500,000. The IGA requires that to be paid annually over a 20-year period. Second aspect of this ordinance is that in each subsequent year during the 20 years, the payment of $500,000 would come due on or before June 21st of each year. And the Finance Committee previously reviewed and recommended approval of this memo. Any question on that? Moving on to resolutions. First resolution would be to adopt the Chicago Street Corridor Plan, which you previously heard from. Next item 2 through 5 will come before the Public Service Committee tomorrow. Council Memo 32918 is to appropriate motor fuel tax funds in the amount of $297,439.25 for the Washington Street over Hickory Creek Bridge Improvement Project. I'll just continue here. Council Memo 33018, resolution appropriating motor fuel tax funds of $39,739 for Phase 3 engineering services for the Washington Street over Hickory Creek Bridge Improvement Project. Council Memo 33118, resolution authorizing the acquisition of a piece of private property in the amount of $4,678. Council Memo 33218 is also a resolution authorizing acquisition of another piece of private property in the amount of $5,500 as described in the council memo. Any questions on those 4 items coming before the Public Service Committee tomorrow? And then last, Council Memo 33318 would impose a moratorium on the a moratorium, 6-month moratorium on gun dealers. The Land Use Committee recommended a moratorium be approved by the full City Council to give staff time to review all things related to any further zoning or other regulations that would have to do with gun sales, retailers, or other similar type institutions. And be happy to, is there any questions on this particular moratorium? If not, on contracts, let's see, we have 4 coming before the Public Service Commission tomorrow. As I mentioned earlier, contract for the Washington Street over Hickory Creek Bridge Improvement Project in the amount of $297,439.25. There's Council Memo 33618, award a professional service agreement for Phase 3 engineering services, also for the Washington Street over Hickory Creek Bridge Improvement Project for $39,739. A request to authorize or approve a professional service agreement in the amount of $278,700 to Crawford, Murphy, and Tilley for the alternative water source study, Phase 1, that was discussed earlier tonight. And then last, request to authorize to approve a public utilities SCADA, Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System Maintenance Service Agreement for 2018 in the amount of $30,000 to Wunderlich and Malick. Any questions on those award of contracts, those 4 items? And then there is no amendments, change orders, or payments. And that concludes the main items in the City Council agenda for tomorrow night. Madam City Clerk.
Next, we have public comments. Is there anyone present that would like to speak under public comments?
Good evening, everyone. Just wanted to thank the council for being able to listen to what we had to present on this day. My name is Michael White, and I'm the CEO of a film and television production company called Road to Eternity. And what that is, we are a film and television production company that focuses on creating inspiring entertainment through media for the masses. In our state, the film and television industry employs more than 19,000 people and pays over $1 billion in wages. Film and television shows generate a positive balance of trade in nearly every country in the world. We work for both Trinity Broadcast and Total Living Network, two global television networks located in the Chicagoland area. We are co-founders of the J-Town Film Festival, which was held at the Bicentennial Park this year, where aspiring filmmakers were able to exhibit their films. We've also participated in other states and other film festivals as well, which has helped circulate our films in over 7 states. Being a member of Joliet's Home, Channel 6, gives us the opportunity to be able to serve our local community with programming of special events, and some of our films have also been featured on this channel as well. Our latest project, Reflection, and this is our official poster right here, is an inspirational film about a young son imitating the image of his father, because every father should remember that his son will one day follow his example instead of his advice. We would love for you to join us for the world premiere of our short film Reflection, held Sunday, June 24th at 5:00 p.m. at the Clarion Hotel, 411 South Larkin Avenue in Joliet. This is a free event. We are currently producing 5 television programs that will be featured on the online streaming service Roku. Our office is located at 1000 Esseting Road in Joliet. You can contact us by calling our office at 815-725-2789, or you can visit our website at www.road2eternity.net to get more information about our upcoming films and television programming. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Yes.
Look, Miss Sheila, Miss White, if you would mind. The little redhead gentleman that's there. I think his face looks pretty familiar. He's a part of, one of the actors in there.
One of the things that we do in the city of Joliet is we use local actors. There's a lot of aspiring actors, a lot of talent in the city of Champions. And so with this company, what we're doing is we're using, working with local vendors. We work with the hotels, we work with the caterers, the people that are bringing food to the set. And it's really, really exciting to be a part of this project. And I'm a lifelong Joliet resident, so I'm very proud to be a part of the project and working with our city. This is one of the actors. His name is Edward Keegan, and it's his first film that he starred in. And so he's really excited. He wants to be an actor. And when we did the auditions at the Bicentennial Park, he was so excited. It was like America's next top actor. So awesome. This film went on to win the Joliet Film Festival for the best drama, and it also won the fan favorite. And so he's looking on doing great things here in the city of Joliet with his acting career. And all of these people, it was their first film. And so we're really excited to be able to reach a handout to other actors and actresses and filmmakers and things like that in the city of Joliet.
Thank you so much. And let us congratulate you too on your
Is there anyone else who would like to speak under public comments? Seeing none, we do have a request for a closed session. Is there a motion to go into closed session to discuss the following subjects? Personnel, collective bargaining, land acquisition or conveyance, pending or threatened litigation, after which the meeting will be adjourned.
Second.
It's been motioned and seconded to approve. Councilman Dickinson.
Aye.
Councilwoman Gavin.
Aye.
Councilman Girl.
Aye.
Councilman Hug.
Aye.
Councilman Morris.
Aye.
Councilman Mudrin.
Aye.
Councilwoman Coleman.
Aye.
Councilman Turk.
Aye.
Motion carried.
It's weird.